Okay, so the first thing you really want to do is go to scalp. I think the scalp is the number one issue here. Let's just take off the hair for now. So what they kind of have going on is that the top half of the head is just not really proportioned right from the front. From the back, he's kind of fine the way his head is proportioned, but we can reduce this forehead size by messing around with some of these sliders. The number one is going to be the scale and the height sliders. So if we reduce the height down, we can see that we already have less of a kind of 7-head situation going on, a little bit more in a normal proportion from the front. The scale changes the whole sort of size of the scalp, which, you know, like from the back might make him look like he has a bit of a smaller head, but from the front, again, is just reducing that bulbous scaling. So you can potentially take this down as far as you want, but you do want to check and make sure that he doesn't have a pinhead from the back. So I'm pretty sure in my last Qunari character we went for about 70 on both. Maybe it was slightly less on height. So now already he has more of a normal sized forehead. I don't think width is as important. It does change the scalp slightly, but it tends to create this little bit of a divot on the side of his brows. We can fix his brows as well. Obviously that's in one of the other sliders, but it's just important to come into the scalp section, I think, just to kind of get the proportions right before we start messing with the rest of everything else. Profile, I believe, is back and forward. So that we can reduce a little bit just to get rid of this slight bulge on the front of his forehead. So let's just do that. Okay, that's looking pretty good. We don't want to reduce it too much, just because the back of his head will then get a bit too small. You can always mess around with altering, you know, how extreme each slider is. So we could make the profile smaller again, but then just make the scale a little bigger so that the back of his head is increased a bit more. Okay, so now we have like a fairly decent proportion from the front. The other big thing that we're going to need to look at is the brow section. And you can do this with any starting preset that you like, but let's look at his brow. So the head width, I actually think for fixing this problem of proportion, a bigger head is better and a more prominent jaw and chin, because then it will just naturally balance out the proportions of his face. So his forehead won't look so big if the rest of his face is slightly bigger. We don't want to go to extremes about that, obviously, but we do want to just make everything look balanced out. So let's have a look from the side. Again, I'm going to flatten his forehead slightly. I'm going to reduce this prominence because that was kind of where we were at originally. Now we have more of a sloped forehead, which I think looks a bit more natural. So that has pretty much fixed the forehead to something that I'm happy with. We could also change the position of his eyebrows, which would reduce the forehead size. Again, you can move the eyes up and down, so there's no reason not to lift the eyebrows up slightly. It will also be affected by what specific eyebrow hair we choose to go with it. I'm gonna probably just do that. All right. Oh yes, and reduce the eyebrow width in. To see how that makes it much more pronounced if the eyebrows are wide. If the eyebrows are a bit more narrow, then we have this kind of more natural forehead again. We will always have a slight protrusion on the side where the horns are. I think this is very dependent on the skin that you choose as to how natural this looks. I think if this looks more like it is part of his horns and less like it's part of his skin, then we have less of a problem with having a gigantic forehead. So we'll have a look at that when we look at skin tone options. Okay, so I'm pretty happy now with the overall shape of the head and the brow. And we can see that this looks like a much better proportioned face already. Another thing, as I mentioned, that you can effect is the jaw and the chin proportion. So personally, I always mess with these cheeks. I don't like how in all the default heads, they are so pronounced, especially from the side. Look at this. You could cut someone on those. So the next big thing I think is going to be the jaw. I think his jaw needs to be lower to balance out his face. He does have quite a prominent forehead. He always will. He's going to have horns. He's Qunari. So we're going to make his jaw a bit more pronounced to match. So let's have a quick look. I've changed the height. Let's have a look at the width. I think actually the width is pretty good. Could possibly come down a little bit so he's not quite so square. I would like to just change this angle a little bit, and I will adjust the chin as well when we get there. So let's move that in, and then, because this is from the side, so the depth slider is always visible from the side, and then the position slider is going to change the aesthetic from the front. I mean, and this part of it is all going to be dependent on your preferences. I might take it down just a little bit because I will move the chin up, but I think the points of the jaw being lower makes his overall head slightly larger and makes the forehead look a bit more natural. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's just check the overbite. The lip, to look natural from the side, the bottom lip should be ever so slightly further back than the top lip. I know on the 0% setting, they're actually even, but that is dentally incorrect. So from an orthodontic perspective, you want your lower jaw to be sitting inside your upper jaw. So your upper lip should be slightly more protuberant than your bottom lip. So let's go with the 15% overbite, because we can always alter the chin when we get to the chin settings. Okay, happy with the jaw. And then the chin. He has a bit of a low chin. I think that could probably come up a bit. It could be slightly narrower because it's a little bit... Let's look at the depth slider. He just has quite a pronounced chin, which I think is fine for a Qunari, honestly. Okay. I mean, again, it doesn't look bad either way. It's really just dependent on what you'd like with this slider. I probably will just take his jaw down just a little bit, because after fixing the chin, I thought it was actually a little bit small again. Okay, so then the next big thing is your choice of skin texture. So let's look at complexion. Starts with this texture rugged 5, which I think is probably a good thing. I think having a darker skin tone is a lot more forgiving for the 5-head issue than a lighter skin tone. So for me personally, I would probably choose something darker. I like the more grey sort of Qunari tone. So let's go with something here maybe. Having more or less melanin just change your overall darkness. Maybe something like that. But flipping through the skin tones, you can see it strongly affects the texture of this part of his skin. This will make his forehead look a lot bigger if we don't have this kind of almost connection between the horn texture in the middle, like that. So if there is blank skin in the middle, his head already looks weird. It looks really bizarre when there is so much skin going back before it reaches the hairline. I think it's a lot more appealing looking if that is horn. You can see there's variable textures, but some of the skins have the horn texture extending a bit further down. I think that definitely helps reduce the size of the forehead. Although if you have messed with the sliders appropriately, like you've reduced down the size of the scalp and the size of the forehead, you can pick a different skin texture and make it work. That's going to come down to your choice of hair. For me personally, I think the lower the horn coloring, the better. So we'll pick something that has the horn effectively meeting in the middle. Let's see what options we have for that. I'm probably going to go back to what we started with, which was rugged. I'm always kind of just keeping my eye on this bit in the middle to see where the scalp is. I am going to go exactly back to the one that I had at the beginning. But as you could see, as we were scrolling through there's probably 6 or 7 options that have this kind of design, and a few others which do have a slightly lower horn line and slightly less bare scalp in the middle. Okay, so we'll stick with that. The other big thing which is going to make a huge difference for the Qunari is the hair. Unfortunately, they have not given very many hairstyles which have the hairline where I would consider to be the correct place. The Qunari have horns either side of their forehead, but their hair should continue up to the middle of the horns. They should have hair follicles in this section of their forehead. Some of the hairs have that and some of the hairs don't. You always have the option of having no hair. If you've reduced down the scalp and you've made the forehead a bit smaller, having no hair can look completely fine. But because we did mess with the scalp proportions, covering that up with hair is likely to create a better look. So you just need to look through the hairs. There are several options that will work for this, but you've just got to be choosy in what you have. For example, this one has the hairline way too far back. So unless he has a receding hairline, he should be growing hair in the middle. Based on the proportions of his face, his hairline should be about there. As if he was a human, his hairline would be about there. So it would come down to just this point in the middle of his horns. And maybe he does have a receding hairline, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But there are hairs which give you the option. So for example, this ponytail has the hairline in about the right place. May or may not be your aesthetic, but there are plenty of others that have the same. This one has the hairline a little far back, but probably far enough forward that it will definitely work and not look like he has an absolutely mammoth forehead. This one also has the hairline in what I think is the right place. So effectively, I'm looking for a hair that is going to come down between his horns. So let's just go with that for now, since we're on that. One interesting thing about this character creator is that the eyebrow number 31 is not rendered correctly. So as you can see when I click on it, eyebrow 31 is actually quite a nice full brow. They've accidentally used the same thumbnail twice. So this is the skinny version, then this is the fuller version. I think I've used this for like 2 out of 3 characters so far. Now that I've chosen my eyebrow, there might be some minor tweaking to do with the forehead. Just because that's where my eyebrow sliders are. I still find it a little bit weird that the eyebrow selection is not in the same place as the brow sliders. But I might make the eyebrow go up slightly more, but then possibly the whole brow brought down a little bit. Make good use of your scalp sliders and your forehead and brow sliders to just reduce everything down a bit in that area. Balance out the size of the forehead using the jaw and the chin sliders in this section and this section. Choose your hair very carefully to make sure that it has a flattering hairline which is sitting in approximately the location it would on a human. The last tip I would have for trying to reduce the bulk of a Qunari face in this game, especially when viewed from the front, is to pick a horn which is quite close towards the head. So reduce the size of the horns from the front as much as possible and have most of it pointed towards the back. Again, it's going to 100% depend on the aesthetic that you're going for. I just think that that helps make the Qunari faces look a little bit more natural and a little bit more human-like in this game. So for example, these horns are quite close to the head. They don't create too much bulk from side to side. These horns are very wide comparatively, and I think that accentuates the forehead area. I think these ones as well are very close to the face when viewed from the front, and so they really help make the face look a little bit more narrow. Same with these ones. I think because they are more close in and close together, so there are lots of options to choose from. You can see that it just makes a little bit of a difference in terms of how bulky his upper head looks, depending on how wide the span of the horns is when you're looking at it from the front. So there we have it. I've kind of messed with the nose and the eye sliders just a little bit, just to put them a bit more where I'd want it. But you can see the overall effect that I'm going for is just to reduce the size of the forehead and make the scale of the head look a little bit more appropriate. You can do it to a lesser or greater extent depending on what you think looks good. But those are all the sliders that you would use and where to find them that will help you kind of get that less bulbous look. Thanks so much for watching. Hope that you have a good one.